This barley is on trial. You might almost say for its life. Because these new varieties are being raised only in order that their performance can be assessed from various points of view. Some of these tests take place in the laboratory to determine the germination qualities. Some take place in micro-malting cabinets, where production techniques are simulated on a small scale. And of course, they will be assessed from another very important point of view, their yield as a crop. Every year, this country malts enough barley to fill St. Paul's Cathedral 3 times over. And that's just to brew beer. Add to that the barley that's malted to distill whiskey, and what's used in foods and vinegar, and it adds up to a multi-million-pound industry. What's it all about? The art and mystery of malting. The art is the maltsters, but the mystery belongs to nature. It begins with the greatest mystery of all, the seed. When the seed is sown, it lies dormant in the earth. Warmth and moisture stir the embryo to life. A shoot begins to grow within the corn at first. Rootlets are put out. Eventually, they will draw nourishment from the soil. Until then, the plant must live and grow. It does so by drawing on its own food supply. 3/4 of the barley corn is starch, a built-in ration pack waiting to be called on to nourish the growing embryo. Germination sends that call. As roots and shoots push forth, enzymes are created. They act on the starch and convert it to sugars, and also break down reserve proteins to vital amino acids. Luckily for us, it is possible to trigger off this germination process in large tonnages of barley at a time, to let the enzymes be created in the corns, and then to check them until the maltster is ready. Carried out on an industrial scale, this process is called malting. Chiefly, it is about harnessing nature's germination process to convert the starch resources in the barley corn to sugars. This process is completed by the brewer and distiller to produce a fermentable liquor. Some barleys are more suited for malting than others. As well as the variety, the condition of the barley is important too, reflecting the way it has been grown and harvested. Malting begins with buying the right kind of barley.
David, 2 barleys you left with me at market yesterday. 3445 is okay, we can book that. 3447 came out rather higher on nitrogen than we'd anticipated. If you'd like to ease £1 on that price, we can do it for movement next month. Okay? Will do. Thank you.
Most maltsters buy their barley through merchants. Most farmers sell their crop through merchants, trading at markets like this one. Here, bargains are struck for the season's harvest, as farmers and maltsters together feel their way towards the fair price for a particular crop. One of the most important cereal markets is the Corn Exchange at Mark Lane in the City of London. Here, buyers and sellers gather, and at harvest time, many thousand tons change hands in a day, in hundreds of individual bargains. Once the barley is bought, laboratory analysis provides the maltster with an accurate forecast of the way his barley will malt. An important factor is the amount of nitrogen present. This determines the amount of protein in the grain. The higher the percentage of protein, the lower the percentage of starch. Thus, there'll be less sugar and less fermentable material for the brewer and distiller. Older methods still play a part. The nose is a clever instrument for detecting barley that's in poor condition. The fingers can help the eye to see inside. Experience counts for a great deal. Careful drying and storage are vital to the preservation of barleys for malting. Excessive drying temperatures can destroy germination, as can poor storage where barley is not sufficiently aerated or run round regularly from one bin to another. It is essential to check the temperature of stored barley regularly and to keep it cool. When the barley is delivered, the maltster takes samples. He needs to be sure the bulk is the same as the purchase sample. Samples are checked in the laboratory too, as a guide to the maltster. The barley is screened and dried and goes into a silo to await its turn for malting. To stimulate the barley to germinate, the maltster steeps it in water. Steeping normally takes between 40 and 60 hours and consists of 2 to 3 periods under water, alternating with dry periods, during which air is drawn through the grain to promote growth. After steeping, it will look like this. The rootlets are developing, but the starchy endosperm inside is still hard as enzyme production has hardly started. When the maltster judges the time is right, the barley moves into germinating boxes. These are normally separate from the steeping because they need to be equipped to turn and aerate the grain. The green malt will stay there for up to 6 days. During germination, the grains will double in volume. The rootlets develop strongly, an outward sign of the changes that are taking place inside the barley. The growing embryo triggers off the process that will cause enzymes to be formed and break down the internal structure of the corn. This makes the starch available for conversion to sugar and is the purpose of the malting process. These pictures are speeded up, but there's no mistaking the energy of this germinating barley. Deciding the precise moment to stop this activity is a key part of the maltster's skill. Different batches and varieties have different characteristics, and so need different treatment during malting. Each batch must be allowed to germinate to the point where the enzymes are fully activated. Continued growth will only waste the starch reserves in the grain, so the maltster arrests the process by drying on the kiln. Kilning dries the malt from a moisture content of over 40% down to between 2 and 4%. In doing so, it stops the biological processes in the barley corn. But the enzymes have been preserved and can be reactivated when needed. Some types of barley are more suitable than others. What exactly does the maltster look for?
What I would be looking for as a maltster in our raw material is a good sound malting variety barley. One with a fairly bold, even sized berry, with a nicely fine wrinkled skin, with a good evenly filled ventral furrow. This type of barley with a low nitrogen content will always command a premium. A good fermentable material which will give the brewer no problems in fermentation and in runoff. and we like to think that we can give them a fairly high extract yield.
So a good malting barley is important, for it will give the brewer a few more barrels per ton and the distiller more proof spirit. In a sense, malting is really part of brewing and distilling. The processes are continuous. The enzymes that have been created in the germinating barley start by breaking down the internal cell structure of the grain. Next, they will act on the starch and convert it to sugar. Finally, kilning stops the clock. The enzymes are switched off for the time being. Careful kilning hasn't hurt them, though. They're ready to carry on where they left off, making sugar as nature intended them to. Sugar which can be fermented by the next people in the story, the brewer and distiller. Both use malt in just the same way to produce a strong sugar solution for fermentation. In addition, the export market for malt has become increasingly important. Lesser markets are for food and vinegar. Both brewer and distiller begin in the same way. They grind up the malt, outer husk and inner material together. And the enzymes are still there, waiting to be switched on again. Mixing the ground malt with hot water switches them on, and the enzymes dormant since kilning now resume their activity. The mash tun is really like a big teapot. In it, the hot water acts on the mash or ground malt to make an infusion, extracting the sugars which will be used to ferment into alcohol. What then is the brewer looking for?
Well, there are two things we're looking for primarily in malt quality. The first is extract. That is the fermentable sugars that we extract from the mash tun, which we ferment into alcohol at the fermenting stage. The second is protein. That is important in head formation on beer and giving lacing on a glass. And broken down into simpler substances, it helps the yeast nutrition in the fermentation process. Every brewer in the country will tell you that the better the quality of the malting barley, the better the beer we can produce from it.
After the wort, the sugar solution has been drained off, it goes into the copper with hops for boiling. It is cooled, strained, and yeast is added to make it ferment. Now it is beer. All it needs is to have the particles of yeast filtered out, and it's ready for putting into either bottles or cask. The distiller also begins with malt. He begins in the same way as the brewer, grinding the malt and mixing it with hot water to activate the enzymes, thus converting the starch to sugars. The wort is allowed to cool, and yeast is added. This sets off fermentation, producing an alcoholic liquid similar to beer, which the distiller calls wash. Now the distillation process begins. The wash is heated in these large copper vessels, pot stills, until the alcohol vaporizes. The vapor is condensed back into a liquid form, and the whole operation is repeated, vaporizing and condensing to achieve a high degree of purity. Even then, the first and last runnings of the second distillation are not considered sufficiently pure, and only the middle cut goes into bond to mature. The brewer and distiller are working with raw materials that are living things, creating their own chemical changes. To them, the key to smoothly flowing production is malt of a consistent quality. A consistent quality in malt depends chiefly on the barley it's made from. This is the responsibility of the farmer. The farmer has a lot of things on his mind. First of all, there's the weather. It makes his crops grow, but seldom in the way he wants. Too much rain, too little rain. Too much sun, not enough sun. And predators lie in wait. Pests, diseases, hungry adversaries who are on the lookout for their share of the farmer's crops. Doing his best to outwit all these opponents, pitting his judgment and experience against them, the farmer has as his ultimate objective a good crop. His farm is his business, and when he puts down land to barley, he looks for the maximum return.
Quite frankly, it's a gamble like any other crop. In a good year, you don't get so much money for it because there's plenty about, but then it's balanced out by better prices in a bad year. And of course, with winter barley, the malting barley, we can get it sold right off the field almost, and it makes more room for the wheats coming along.
At the National Institute of Agricultural Botany at Cambridge, trials are carried out on new and old varieties. Constantly, research here and at the Scottish Colleges of Agriculture is trying to develop barley varieties that will give the farmer a better yield, as well as giving the maltster the quality he requires.
Well, here we have an example of two varieties which are on test and will be considered for the recommended list at the end of this year. That'll be their third year. This one is a malting variety from Holland, and the variety on the other side is a feeding one. It's an English variety.
Not all barleys possess the special characteristics that make them suitable for malting. So how can the maltster persuade the farmer to grow the particular varieties he needs? At NIAB, malting on a small scale plays a big part. In these micro-malting cabinets, barley can be steeped, germinated and kilned in a miniature version of a maltings. The milled malt is then used to produce wort in a miniature version of the first stages of brewing. The barley's readiness to germinate is another critical area. Tests are carried out to quantify each variety's germination characteristics. Impartial investigation of this kind is invaluable. Evaluation at NIAB benefits farmer and maltster alike. It points the way to improved varieties of malting barley, keeping practical considerations always in front. A variety may have outstanding characteristics for malting, but prove a poor yielder, or be extremely susceptible to disease. A good malting barley, in practical terms, must fit in with the farmer's needs and give him a good cash return. Malting is big business in the UK. Over 2 million tons of barley are made into malt each year for home use and export. The brewer and distiller look to the maltster to provide the right quality of malt. The maltster looks to the merchant to provide the right barley at the right price. The merchant looks to the farmer to provide the type of barley to make good quality malt. The chain of quality begins with the farmer. Breeders of new varieties know that a good malting barley must also be a good barley on the farm. And all the time we are dealing with a natural thing, not a man-made one. Nature cannot be hurried. In the art and mystery of malting, improvements in the art must sometimes wait on discoveries concerning the mystery.